was a quiet week, a little too quiet. But now this is happening. So this week we have put our focus into a component of coding and billing that everyone at one point or another has to deal with. And some people actually do this full time. Coding education, whether it be a provider that needs improvement under documentation or on the rules of bundling and unbundling, a newly hired coder that needs specific training to perform the core functions of this new job, a patient that's not sure why they received a bill, or even an administrator who's asking about claim denials. We must all be able to explain the process through carefully and sometimes brief discussion. Sometimes they can't hear more than 5 minutes worth of us ramble and ramble and ramble, unlike everyone here. So there are many situations in which providing education in coding is necessary. In order to get that information out to you fine people, we have three panelists to cover multiple angles here. First, we have Becky Poff, who is a current legal affairs rep and former senior healthcare auditor and educator at Florida Blue. We have Bonnie Hardy, who was a coding educator and auditor at Stanford Health. And lastly, we have Catherine Rose, who is an ambulatory surgery care ASC coding auditor and educator and risk adjustment coder at Signature Healthcare in Massachusetts. And then lastly, there's always me, who just looks pretty on camera. So let's get down to the main part of it. Yeah, thank you. Sure. In regards to education, I know I mentioned some like random people that we have to educate, but who do we typically have to educate when it comes to coding? And what is the purpose of providing the education? And let's start with Catherine.
So I educate on both sides. I educate providers and coders, and usually it comes in various ways to us what needs to be educated. Sometimes a coder will say that their provider is overcoding, undercoding. Sometimes we get notified by a health plan that there's an outlier. Sometimes it's an internal report that may say something where the leadership will reach out to educate. That's as far as the providers go. The coder side, I also work in our scrubber. I look at various things, and I'm also the physicals to Medicare person. If you try to bill a physical to Medicare, I'm gonna come after you. But so I get to see the different things that are in there that might confound the coders, and they also turn to me with their questions. So, and I figure if one of them is asking, it's probably a good idea just to educate everybody. So if I get a question, I'll answer that coder, but then I will turn it into a blast. We have 21 coders. So I will send it out to everyone and also create a new file in our coder resources folder that we have on the shared drive. So it comes from many different places. Sometimes the providers reach out and say, can you check on my coder? I mean, sometimes they don't understand that it's them, not the coder. So I have to do both. I end up doing both of them so I can respond to their inquiries accordingly and appropriately.
How about you, Bonnie? Anything you want to add to that?
I do a lot of the same. I work with our coders. Primarily, though, I work with all the onboarding providers. And, I think that it's just a matter of sometimes you even play referee. The coder may say to the provider, at least in our organization, the way they have a process of doing it, hey, this isn't necessarily coded correctly. And the provider is going to push back. And so I'm sort of that voice of reason or tiebreaker. I already know, what the coder has said to the provider. We've also made sure that the coder is correct. And then sometimes it just takes another person to explain it to them. And actually, sometimes just saying you're the educator, having that position makes a difference. I do think that they get so many, correspondence from the coders that they're overwhelmed, they get frustrated. I'm talking about providers. And so they need sort of another person. That's also almost like when you ask, may I speak to your supervisor, please? It's kind of like that. And so usually they get it. Also, just hearing a different tone, a different voice, a different way of saying it, somebody different helps. But yeah, I work with the onboarding providers and the coders as well. And I like what you said. I will create something. Once there's a question, I'm like you, Catherine. I'll say, oh, I think there are more people that want that information. And I do two things. I create a cheat sheet and then a longer education, and they're all on our provider education page. So sounds very similar. Yeah.
It works well.
Now you, Becky, you handle things from a different angle. So what's your perspective on who you get to educate?
Yeah, mine is very different. Obviously, in my prior role, there was some education that obviously go out the door via audits, right, to whoever we were auditing. But for me, primarily, it was it could be assisting and educating anybody that was on my team, coworkers, other auditors. But it was also basically any staff really in our payment integrity office. Most of the Blues plans have payment integrity offices. So that could be anybody clinical, anybody in the appeals, edits areas. Really the way I kind of looked at it is a lot of times in coding and auditing, there, especially when it comes to like on the physician side, like with E&M, there's not necessarily one set answer. And so my job was really just to help give them the sources to go find the reputable sites and be able to defend your answer, and that would go with both sides, right? When we'd get the things from the physicians and to be able just to hold your ground of whether you're right or not is, but the education piece is really important, of just being able to defend where you went and researched and things like that, and just to kind of hold your position of what you found. So mainly it was clinical, or like I said, my coworkers, anybody really in our payment integrity office type staff.
Okay. So let's talk about your daily routine. So now that education might be a large portion of a lot of your role because you are coding auditors and educators, but even when you were starting, like what was your daily routine and how much of that was spent educating leading up to now? So let's talk about how you used to handle, how often you have to educate versus how much you have to now. Is there like a big difference, or is it still like a major part of your role?
Is that to me?
Anybody. Let's start with you. So like you said, you used to be an auditor full time, but even before that, I'm sure you were like a new coder. How much has it progressed where you had to educate more and more and more, or has it been always this same component?
So in my prior role, I was an auditor for roughly about 14 years. That was basically when I was a new auditor, when I became a new auditor back in 2007. That's when I got my first certification, was my CPC back in 2007. And I wasn't like an auditor one type level, I guess is what they would consider it. So I kind of worked through just an auditor, up to a senior auditor, and then got the CPCI, I think in roughly like 2017 or 2018. And then now, having shifted from the education piece from that perspective into the litigation. And again, none of this conversation tonight, I'm not representing my employer, so I'm just going to throw that out there. But the education continues on even with the current role that I'm in right now, right? Like, even though I'm not providing education, so to speak, to other auditors, there is still education that goes out, whether it's in defending corporate lawsuits, suits that come in, or civil remedies, or whatever the situation is that's kind of coming in the door now. So the daily has definitely shifted from where I was really looking at it every single day, the way like an auditor and a coder was, to now I'm looking at it as depending on what the cases and the complaints are about. So it has definitely shifted for me in I guess that aspect of it.
How about you, Bonnie? when you first started, was there a lot of education given to you, and then did you start getting more and more, or did you typically handle the same workload then that you do now?
I started out as a multi-specialty coder. The organization that I started with was very good with education, so I felt like I got a good base outside of, taking my courses and passing my test. So when I became a real world coder, I felt that I did get some good education. But as we all know, that's just the beginning. It's constant. But my personality was someone who likes to show other people. And I happen to have just a great aptitude for coding. It came sort of naturally for me. So other coders, even though I was a newer coder, would ask me questions. And that happened pretty quickly. And then I just would assist them, and then I would, help providers, and before you know it. So it was a gravitation for me to actually become an educator. And so I feel like now that I am an educator, so back to that question, in the beginning, you only do like 3 a day, forget production. You're like, oh my gosh, I did 4 encounters today right after you get out of school. But, then you get better and better. And, and like I said, I gravitated towards education and teaching others and mentoring them. And so I'm really happy to be in the role that I'm in now. But I don't think that ever stops. I think we're all constantly learning, and there's always a change in coding, so there's always something to learn. So yeah, and of course now that I am an educator, that's all I do all day, every day.
Mm-hmm.
And how about you, Catherine?
So for me, this is actually a new role, or actually within the organization as well. I've always been a bit of an educator myself, whether I was titled it or not. When I was team lead, I used to do Coder Education Monthly. I'm back to doing that now, once a month. Well, the coders have to split their time. They split it in half. So like the first 2 first 2 Wednesdays of the month, I'm doing 2-hour educations for the coders. And then I have built up our onboarding documentation and 2021 and 2023 E&Ms, right? We have that's like the bulk of what I end up having to educate the providers about. Our surgical coders are excellent. They pretty much have the finger on the pulse of the main procedures that we do, or we will do again when the hospital opens back up. But I do so enjoy, I actually used to teach medical assisting. Nothing like teaching a bunch of people how to draw blood. It's really cool when they finally get it. And start chasing people down the hallway because they need their veins. But so I've always been a bit of that in me. I'm kind of a natural leader, I guess, but I'm no better than anybody else. So it's a constant learning, as Bonnie and Becky both were saying. You never know everything. And just when you think you got it figured out, I always joke with the providers. I say, well, it's beginning of the year, or October's coming, and a bunch of people are sitting in a room and saying, how can we make the coders crazy this year? So, because everything will change. So that's part of what is exciting about it, but it's also part of the scramble when you have to get the new information out. And I don't know about what your location, Bonnie, but our providers kind of are tasked to be coders. And
same here. Yes.
That's unfortunate because that's not what they went to school for. In fact, they don't even have a class in coding in doctor school, which is at this point, they should probably do one. But so, they do rely on us to help them. And I think once you get the cred with them, which is actually why I went after my approved instructor certification, to get some cred. And once you get that respect and they understand that you're here to help them, you're not there to insult or demean or say you're doing it all wrong. I think they really appreciate you after a while and will call on you, but you do have to earn it. You don't get it walking in the door.
I agree.
And she posed a very good socially based question. Why do providers have the code? I mean, they don't schedule their own patients. They don't clean off their own, floors. What makes coding any different? I've never understood that. Well, back to the conversation on auditing, because that's never going to be asked.
All right.
That's another topic.
I digress.
That's another topic, but I do have to say this. I think it's a shame because the whole purpose of coding is also to get world statistics, social determinants of health, and,
Yeah.
external causes and all of that.
Mhm.
And providers are just going to do the minimum to get by. And I don't blame them. I get it. But it doesn't allow coders to be coders, what we go to school for and what we do continuing ed for, and for them to focus on patient care. That's
Patient
my
care.
soapbox. I'm off. Thank you, Catherine, for bringing that up.
Totally there. Yes. Yeah. But that's part of the education part of it too, right?
It is.
Is
Yeah.
helping them to understand a little more, to keep our money. So people like Florida Blue don't come after us and say, well, you're taking it back.
That's
I
also
don't
another
know.
episode.
I'm not going to
That's
touch
also
that.
another episode.
Anyway.
All right, so when it comes down to determining when education is needed, who makes that call, and when typically do you determine that you need to educate somebody? Let's start back with Catherine and go back in a clockwise circle.
I think that is brought forth by a lot of times it's a team member, it's a coding person, it's the provider itself. I onboard all the new providers and I make it quite clear that I am available to them at all times. After 6 months on board, they get audited and I will meet with them in person. I will travel to their location and we will go over their coding. So usually they're pretty good. NPs are great. The MDs just I think they're more concerned with the patient. Nurse practitioners are more holistic, I think. So they seem to have a better grasping of what constitutes a level 4, but I think a lot of it comes from internal recommendations and observances from people who actually see their notes and or they reach out.
I agree with you, Catherine, and you alluded to this in, I think, your answer to the first question, and that is, they may be on an outlier report. They may, as you just mentioned, maybe we're seeing a trend by denials. If everybody's doing their job, and this is the big if, and it's very difficult with turnover and the changes, and I feel like everybody's overworked, but if in a perfect world, denials can let you know. The coders can let you know when they see trends. We can see it on an outlier report. And for those of you who are new, what is an outlier report? It's a report that you can run to see how that doctor, for example, if they're billing a whole bunch of 99215s or level 5s, it could be an O5 for a new patient. And we run that and we say, hey, you're doing a lot more than your peers, not only at this organization, but compared to what Medicare thinks. And then they're on a report. And when they're on a report, then you don't want them to be so high, or you want to figure out why they're so high. And so that's when we would educate. First, we figure out why they have so many level 5s and see if they're warranted or they're not, or what we need to tweak. Usually it's the 3 to 4s, that sweet spot that we always have trouble with. But so there are many different reasons. And of course, just like you said, Catherine, the providers will reach out. Practice managers will reach out. So it's multifaceted for sure.
Yeah, and to kind of jump in, I think both of the ladies answered as well at the very first question when they said, when they're starting to get questions and they're like, you know what, I think it's time to do education. Because when somebody has asked a question maybe more than once, that's usually a good clue of like, okay, let's just go ahead, during a team huddle, as we call them, like our weekly meetings or whatever, whether it's that or some other, clues for me, especially my prior role was when I would, we'd be getting feedback from other areas. If an auditor maybe was conducting an audit on something that was maybe they shouldn't have been, whether it was feedback from coming back in from another area or feedback coming back in from a provider, sending an appeal saying, no, we are allowed to do this. Here is the op report or whatever it is. And, here's why this modifier, whatever the situation was. Like, those are good teaching situations to talk about during, like I said, our team huddles. And I love op reports. I think, like, Bonnie and I were saying, like, just being drawn to teaching. It's just one of those things. So I think that you have a lot of the clues, just kind of when people are struggling or when the questions are coming up repeatedly, or like I said, it can be coming from inside the organization, other areas reaching out saying, we're getting this a lot from this one or these couple different auditors, and like something's got to be done. Or it could be coming from the management, right? The management could be saying, hey, we want to, start getting into, like, John, I know you know a lot about cardio. Hey, we want to kind of venture into cardio a little bit, right? That's a very, very difficult specialty. Everybody knows that. It's one of the most hated CPC chapter 10, right? Everybody knows that dreaded chapter 10 is CPC. So that may be something where the management says, hey, we want to touch a little bit about on cardiology next year, because it's not something we normally audit because everybody hates it except for John, maybe. So there may be some little cues like that would help me kind of know, where we were going to go or what we needed help on.
And to tail into that, I think everybody you want to try and get everybody involved to be saying the same thing, the same way every time. You can't have one person telling a provider this and then someone turning around and saying something different. So you have to make sure that it's like, or get an organizational determination. If there's gray, go to compliance, find out, get somebody to make a decision that we can, that, as you say, Becky, stand behind and defend. You got to defend. You should be able to defend every decision that you make.
That's what I was taught when I was a coder. Don't come to me unless you've done all of your research. And then when you come to me, tell me what research you've done so that I know that you have, and then be able to ultimately defend why you did what you did. And I had, this is a very quick story, but I had a woman who was my manager. It was my first coding job, and I must have, in her opinion, done something that she didn't agree with. And so she was like, why did you do da 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 da? And I remember going, why would you ever talk to a coder like that? We're all detailed, thoughtful people. So I learned from that very first interaction. And then when I was able to tell her what I was thinking, she went, oh. So I made sure, and I continue to always think of that. It was that impactful. And so the first thing I ask a coder, a provider, anyone, so tell me your thought process. And that way you can see where they may have gone off the rails in education.
Yeah.
Very good.
This is one of those situations in coding when I'm something before I was a coder, I was one of those lifelong students at college. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. The MBA was obviously up there, but time wasn't available. But there's the old principle in physics. What happens when an immovable object meets an unstoppable force? Well, we don't know until you're a coder who knows the coding rules, comes up to a person that doesn't want to hear those rules, and we have to come to some kind of agreement or compromise.
I think assuming positive intent, that's one of the things I really try when you're educating is, and it's hard, right? Because we all have bad days. And I think we'll probably, we may get to this during something later on, but just assuming a positive intent. Like when Bonnie said, what was your thought process? Instead of how that person spoke to her right off the bat, that's ugly. Nobody wants to, interact with people like that. Just assume that person is trying their best, did the right thing, and hear them out. And then you can kind of go from there. And I read that somewhere. I think it was actually on LinkedIn, just assume positive intent. I thought that is exactly the way.
Yeah. And when a coder comes to you, because I always tell somebody too, if you made a mistake, you need to tell somebody, because it will get discovered. Nothing in this business doesn't, and it's worse.
And it can always
remember
be
two things.
It can always be fixed.
That's what I say, Becky. I say you can always fix it.
And no one got injured in the commission of that mistake.
No,
so at least from what we do. So just come to somebody, we can fix it, but don't try and hide something because it's not a good look.
And also, don't waste everybody else's time. Don't go from coder to coder. I call it pollinating. Don't go waste valuable energy. Go straight to who you're supposed to, and there you have it. And that way, everybody can still do their job, and you learn something. So.
Exactly.
So let's talk about different approaches to education, because there's multiple different ways of talking about tops and handling systems. So let's start with Catherine again, go backwards again. What are the different approaches you take when dealing with certain types of education, and what usually works
Well,
best in your opinion?
I am a definitely in-person person if I can do it, if it's possible. I find talking with people in 3D is much better than getting them this way. I just think it's important to go and shake someone's hand and, you know, sit down and look at them in the face and bring samples of what you're doing and always have the wherewithal to say, I don't know, but I will find out. Don't try and fudge it because they're going to know and it's not a good look. So be willing to say, I'm not sure, but you know what, I'm going to find out. And then you're going to learn something too that day. But, you know, I like to bring samples. I prefer to do it in person. I will do it in if I have to in teams, but I'm usually meeting a provider at 6:30 in the morning before they get going, because that's the best. Either that or you're going to wait 4 hours if you go try to do it at the end of the day, and lunches never works. So I always tell the provider, I'm willing to come to you whatever works for you, whatever is convenient for you. Patients first, always.
Always.
So, but that's usually, and then I usually will follow up with whatever documentation I have that I can email to them as a follow-up. And then that way it's still fresh in their mind. They now have my email. Anything that I handed out to them, I make sure it goes back as a PDF so it's searchable. And then they can reach out to me when they realize I'm very approachable. And I do a lot of presentations to the chapters and stuff, and I'm very laid back in my presentation. Just, you know, stop me, ask me, use me nicely though, not in that. So I prefer to do it to teach in person, but then back it up with the proper documentation and authoritative sources for whatever it is that they need to know.
Right. I know I will, I do, it's not always feasible to do it in person. I actually don't live in Connecticut. So for me, that's not something that I can do, but they know that we will hop on a call. We will hop on Teams, whatever. While I'm actually auditing them, I'm sending them emails so that for that particular encounter, so that they have their own real world thing. And there's a lot of back and forth there where they can email, and they are extremely receptive. You know, one of the things is I didn't necessarily want to take at first I thought I was going to be teaching coders, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then they said, you know, I think you're going to teach all the providers. And I really had to stop for a moment and go, I don't know if I want to do that, because there's always sort of that friction or that disconnect. But I don't think that exists nearly as much anymore. It has not in my experience. The providers have been amazing. Now, a lot of them might be out of residency. The younger, newer providers coming in know that this is part of their job, whether they like it or not, so they embrace it a little bit more. But that's not exclusive to them. I've talked to many, many providers who have been doing it a long time that are very receptive. I think they know. I mean, and the first thing I tell them is the same thing that you said is, you know, I'm sorry that you have to code, but I'll make it as easy as I can, and we're going to have fun while we do it. And they can hear the passion and they can feel it, and they know that I'm sincere, and they know that I'm absolutely there to help them. And the only other thing I want to add is when I talk to them, I say this: I may send you 5 emails today, and you might go, oh my gosh, I can't do anything right. I said, but it's not about that. I am not a doctor. This is only about your coding and your documentation. This is not representative of the type of provider you are. And then they go, oh, okay. So yeah, you do you all day long as the provider. I'm just trying to help you with your coding and documentation. So you might get 5 emails, but they're to help you, and they're showing you on each encounter so you can learn. But I'm not a doctor. I'm a coder, and I'm only teaching you about that.
Right. And you know what I say to them all the time? You didn't know that you didn't know until somebody told you that you didn't know.
Exactly.
So, you know, how would you know if somebody didn't tell you?
And I also say, you don't have to memorize anything. I'm going to send you a lot of information. You just have to, I want you to, when you're not busy, you know, you're having a glass of tea or an adult beverage or whatever, and you're relaxing, you're not being interrupted, please just at least familiarize yourself with what I've sent you, because, and then know where you put it so that when you need it, it's accessible. But nobody is expecting you to memorize it. We don't have it memorized. It's about knowing where to look when you need to.
Boom.
Yeah, I'm just going to add just real quick. I mean, because I think that obviously we're in different worlds, but like a lot of what you're saying kind of resonates, especially, Catherine mentioned like making sure they know how to find, the authoritative, documentation. I think that goes for all of us, right? Like we all want something that's reputable. I think that what Bonnie just mentioned, as far as, when she mentioned to the physicians, like, you don't have to have this memorized, that goes with everything, right? We all teach that to coders, right? Like I taught Vilt for a little bit for the AAPC, and like how much of that, especially when you have the new coders, the CPCAs, or even the CPCs, the ones that have some, the background, like they try to memorize everything. No, it's a matter of knowing where to go, creating documents, maybe throwing in links, things like that. I personally use OneNote a lot because, like with what I do now, getting into like kind of my current role, I have so many different step outs of what I have to do and need help with now. I use, the Microsoft Office. I have to use OneNote, and I just put a lot of if I found a great contact for whatever it was, whether it was, somebody that helped me with membership and billing, I put it all in there. And the same type of thing can be used for whatever it is that a coder or an auditor, create a document like that, whether it's a document in Word where you're just putting stuff together that you can just kind of quick reference back. So there's a lot of, I think, education that you can just continually do for yourself of, if you find a link, if you figure out where the federal registers are, put that into a link so that, it might go bad after a year, but you kind of know the steps of how to get there. Those are, I think, the things where we can teach ourselves. So that's just stuff I wanted to add.
And Becky, when you said don't memorize, the thing is that I find when a coder memorizes the codes, it's actually detrimental. Because when that changes, I can't tell you how many people are like, oh, that's blah, 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 blah. And you're like, and they put it in, and I'm like, no, it now has another, so you almost don't, you've got to fight that tendency to want to memorize everything, because it's not always going to be your friend.
Yeah. There was a situation that happened January 1st of this year, and those who know cardiology know that a lot of the major intervention procedures include ultrasound guidance, but some pay for it. But Medicare said, well, no, we're not paying for anything anymore. And they set that in motion for about 4 months, and they've already reversed it. So the whole memorizing, things that I've been doing, been done that way for like 20 years, all of a sudden change, and everybody, rememorizes that rule, but then that rule went away. So sometimes you just have to like constantly just keep an eye on things, because this is never going to stay the same.
Right.
It's happened, and there's things happen that you might not even catch for 3 or 4 months, because there's no way to track every single policy change and every single. There are people out there that every year they go ahead and they read the Medicare update to the Medicare prospective fee schedule, and they pick apart all the new changes. But unless you know who those people are, like, you can't do that on your own. You have to wait for guidance.
Yeah.
That's why we end up on every list served that there is.
Yes.
I have so many emails. I'm like, like what you said, sit down with a cup of coffee and just kind of click through and see if there's anything that I need to know,
And you'll still miss something.
Always. Yeah. You'd be in a webinar and go, what did she just say? Oh my God. I write that down. Put it in my OneNote so I can, and I live on OneNote as well, Becky. So I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to ask something really ridiculous, and that's truly always unlike me. But can a coder go through their whole career without having to educate anybody ever at all? I mean, is that something that you can look into? Like win the lottery. Does that happen?
So we all answer at once. No.
Highly doubtful. Yeah.
Because I I know a lot of coders like, I just want to put me in a corner with a laptop and a book and I'm great. But sometimes that's like saying, I'm a chef, but I won't put stuff on the plate.
Oh, yeah.
I
No,
mean,
it just
I
doesn't
think
make
there are
sense.
some coding roles that are less apt to educate others. Like if you're a radiology coder and that's all you do for your whole life is that, you may have a very limited opportunity that you're going to reach out to the radiologist. And I mean, these people tend to read the same things all the time. But if you've been doing it long enough, you're probably going to have to train another coder how to do what they're doing, or you become the nerd in the room who, does see things that other people don't. I think you're always going to pick up something. I think it's the nature of the beast that we do, that you're always going to be that person to say, hey, did you hear? That's becoming an educator right there.
Yeah.
Right. I agree. I don't think you get through without teaching ever. I mean, and I also think this is such a networking, connection building industry, that it depends on, you make friends and colleagues that are just really, really good at something, like you are with cardio. I mean, they would have you on speed dial if they had a cardio question. And that's what you do over time. You just start to know, and you go to events, or even if you don't go to events, just different jobs, you've met different coders, and you find out who had a strength and who was really good at this and who really had a grasp of that. And it just starts to build. People will call you, you'll call people, and that's just the way this business is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think even just stepping out of just the coding type stuff, I think that people would have a really hard time not doing any education of, even if they're just looking at, a Word or an Excel document of, hey, if you save the file like this, it'll save you 3 clicks. Like, they may get away with never having the official, instructor or educator title, but I don't think anybody is ever going to get away with never being able to help or assist or educate, a coworker or a teammate, right? Like I said, it may have nothing to do with they may be an Excel guru, and I'm going to hit you up because I stink at pivot tables. So
Oh my
there's
God, I
always
can't do it
something.
either. I can't do
There's
that either.
there's going. And I'm sorry, my basset hound keeps jumping up here. So if you see a big face with long ears, it's Frederick Clancy the Fancy, my basset. But I think that I don't think anybody, unless you literally have a job where you work at 2 a.m. and you never interact with anybody ever, I think everybody's going to be called on. And I think that's like Bonnie was saying, like, that's kind of the nature of this industry that makes it very, very special, is there is always so much. So,
and I think we may have actually broken a few hearts out there, people that heard that, but sometimes we got to deliver some bad news. Every once in a while you have to educate. The whole thing about working from home and you're isolated and you're just working on your own. It's not 100% the case all the time. It's not always rainbows and unicorns. Sometimes there is that nasty task of having to track somebody down and tell them about themselves. So, good question that I have. This is from the audience. Do you feel you get a lot better response from the educatee if it's voluntary or if they're required to do it? They typically listen more if they come to you or if you go to them. Let's start with yep. Go ahead, Becky.
I was just gonna say, I think it's all in the approach. I mean, I think
That's what I was going to say. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think that is the single biggest, is nobody wants to feel like a dummy, right? Like Bonnie nailed this, right? She got to feel like the dummy, and we have all been made to feel that way, I'm sure, at some point, because we've all either been new or even still. I mean, we still, I'm sure, come across people who it's just maybe the way that they speak or what have you. I think it's all just an approach about, they say you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And so I think that as long as you keep that in mind, like I said, you think about the positive, you assume the positive intent, being kind. We didn't all know now, what we, back then we didn't know what we know now. And I think remembering all of these things, right, exactly, right. So I think, and sometimes what helps me too is like, I love humor. So I think that keeping things light, sharing examples for me personally of times when I goofed up on something, I think helps a lot too, because people, a lot of times, the big buzzword we hear right now is imposter syndrome, right? You cannot be on LinkedIn at all and not see a hashtag imposter syndrome. That's like the single biggest thing right now, is people feeling like they don't fit in or they don't belong. And I think that the sooner we can knock that out and say like, no, there's room for everybody. Everybody fits in, regardless of their, what they might think. There is room for everybody in this profession. I think that's one of the greatest things about coding, auditing, billing, the 90,000 different specialties that are out there. Showing grace. And like I said, I feel like it's best if I can kind of show the goofy side of where I've messed up myself, because then they see like, oh, this person with, 15 certifications or whatever, like she's made dumb mistakes as well. Like we all do. We're human. I think that's for me, that's how my personal approach is it's all just in how you go about speaking to the other person in kindness and being graceful and things like that. So
I completely agree. That's what I was going to say as well. And that's actually the first thought that came to my mind, and that is it's all in the approach. And I do, just like you, I love humor. So, and also I speak very directly. I don't kind of, maybe possibly perhaps if you get a chance, if you could, I mean, I don't want to pressure you. I don't do all that. They don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. So I'm like, can't do that. And let me tell you why. Or here's a thought, or here's whatever. But again, I think you said it absolutely perfectly, Becky.
Again, I think you're right. Be courteous of their time. And, they want to be concise, complete, and short. If you can say it in 7 words, don't use 15.
I say precise and concise. That's what I tell them. Precise
Perfect.
and concise.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like
you
that.
guys can use it if you want. There you go.
Oh, I'm gonna.
Yeah.
So, Wait,
and that's what I
my
tell them.
window.
Put it in your window. Precise and concise.
But I totally agree. That's and
yeah, I think
humor definitely. Yeah. And share your errors.
I have a little
when I
sticker on my wall that says "Be bright."
Exactly.
What is it?
Go ahead.
What does it say? Be bright.
No, what does it say?
It says "Be bright, be brief, and be gone."
There you go. Hit and run, right?
I like that
you want to hit and
too.
run.
I am.
But I know when I onboard, I'm the last person. They sit in a room all morning, and people come in and cycle through, and I'm the last one. I go in at 10. Yeah, 10. They get lunches after me, so I start with that almost right off. Like, look, we got 45 minutes. I've got a lot to tell you. Let's go. Lunch is on the horizon, and and I think that they kind of go, oh, she knows we've been sitting here for all this time, and get it going.
Do you withhold food until they finish education? Like, is that like a motivator? So like, okay, lunch is until I'm done speaking, so there'll be a test.
And sometimes I see them looking at their clocks. I'm like, we're almost there. But last time
you go slow.
Right?
All right, if you guys are not going to pay attention, it's going to be longer. Until you
stretch this out. Let's just stretch it out.
We can do this the easy way or the hard way.
Exactly. We can do this. We can do this quicker. We can do it the hard way. Exactly. But
I like that.
Recognizing that they're already on information overload by then, and a lot of what I'm going to say is something they've never heard before, but it's extremely important. So I try to I don't go down the rabbit hole too far on anything, but I tell them that everything they'll need to know is first of all, it's in your folder. I make a folder for everybody. It's personalized, who it is. And then everything I did there gets sent to them as a PDF afterwards. So it's just being aware of the limitations, I think. And as you both said, be polite, be funny if you can, but you got to figure out who you're talking to fairly quickly.
Yeah. Know your audience. Yep. Good
So
point.
there's a question that I didn't put on my list, but what's the difference between educating and coaching? So when people get educated, like that's one thing, but coaching is another negative thing. So what's the difference between that in our industry? Like, what are some of the things we should be aware of with that?
I think coaching usually means something has occurred that you're having to give them feedback on. I think that's the way I view the difference between the two. Educating is usually like, hey, we want to look at cardiology, maybe down the line. Coaching to me is usually like, I've received some feedback on, whatever the situation is. That's kind of how I view the two difference. And again, like I feel like the approach is still kind of the same. It's just, know who the audience is, but the approach is still the same. But for me, that's how I view the two different ones.
I would say it's about, for some reason, education sounded to me like they didn't know something, and coaching sounded like they do, and you're having to perhaps refine something or change something that they know. So that was my interpretation of that, is new for education. It's new to them, or you go into a deeper level and not just hit the highlights, but coaching is maybe fine tuning a little bit or making some adjustments.
Refine's a good word. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with them.
Now, what about when you're in an education?
I don't know that I've done a lot of coaching, so that makes complete sense. So
yeah. What if you're in a situation where you're in an education and the provider just comes up to me and says, "Listen, I don't have time for this. Just tell me what I need to say."
Oh, they do that. John,
yeah.
can you say that? Tell me what I need to, just tell me what to write. Tell me what to code. Tell me what to do. And you have to say to them, we can't do that. Every patient encounter, every patient's needs are different. But there are brains, and we have to realize, like we keep saying in this cast here, is that, know your audience. And you have to realize those are very linear, black and white thinkers, and they're trying, but they just need, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that is a real struggle for that type of personality. I remember one in particular that I had said that to me straight out and just couldn't get the nuances, just was having a real struggle with that. So we hear it, but we just have to say, there is no one size fits all. I'm sorry. I really wish there was. I'll help you as much as I can, but you're going to have to apply these methods,
right,
and with different scenarios, because I can't be there with you all the time. And
so do you hear, tell me what I need to write to get to a level 4. What do I have to write to? What do I need to say?
Right. Yeah.
I can't tell you that. I can't lead you down a road. I can't. It's also against my ethics and my creed and all that good stuff. We can't do that. So,
yeah, unfortunately, we didn't go to medical school.
Correct. I am not clinical.
That's right.
Well, can't you just look at we had one doctor say, can't you just look at the GFR? And we're like, well, I can look at it, and I have a little chart here that says what it is, but I can't diagnose the patient. So it's and I don't think they realize that until you actually tell them. It's like, I can't, the only lab I can code off of is a COVID result. And that was because they made a special dispensation to us when COVID started. So sometimes I don't think they know our limitations either. So sometimes when you tell them that, they go, oh, I didn't know that. So it helps.
All right. So Catherine and Becky, you both have the CPCI, which is the coding instructor. Is that useful? Do you get a lot of use out of that?
I think I actually got it when I was coming back to take the role of educator. And I think I got a lot of information out of how to educate different levels of people, how to, the tactile versus the auditory versus the visual learners, learn about all that different things, and how to pick up on somebody who you're actually educating that way. that needs that extra. Like there's a lot of people who can deal with the e-books, but there are some people who have to have the paper. So there's learning of the different ways of how people learn, I found was very helpful in my role as an educator. And I think when I have my signature at the end of my email, that when it says approved instructor, somehow it helps for them to, they got rid of the CPCI. That's not even a thing anymore. It's approved instructor. So and for a while I didn't have it on there. And my director was like, put it on. You earned that, put it on there. So, and I think it just helps give a little bit of credibility to the fact that you've learned how to actually instruct. So for that.
Yeah. And I think for me, internally, I would say, 99% of what when I got the CPCI, the approved instructor, it was a CPCI actually stand at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was mainly internal so that I could, because you could teach whatever, specialties or core classes certifications you had.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very big help for my team when we were either getting new auditors coming in who did not have the CPCI, and I think that really to kind of bump off of Catherine's point of anytime anybody has any credentials, I think that helps. Anytime an appeal comes in or an audit goes out either direction, I feel like if I see or saw certificate some type of credentials, I personally had a little bit more respect for that because I was like, okay, that person in general knows the guidelines and the rules and things like that. So I feel like in general that helps with respect kind of both directions. So it was very helpful for me opening doors internally because again, I could teach any of the specialties. So like I had taught, GI and the E&M internally. I've taught multiple CPC internally, like I said, to clinical staff, to our provider appeals departments and some of our claims edit area. But it also during COVID for me, this kind of nuances off a little bit is, so I'm a very big people person, and I lived by myself during COVID. And so I taught being by myself. When COVID hit, I started teaching virtually for the AAPC. So that also allowed me then to have some interaction through the VILT program of being able to teach, even though it was, through the computer, I could at least have the interactions and talk to people and have the connections and things like that when, this was back in like April, May, June, July, August, September, like during the really rough months, there was, no vaccines, and we're not going to obviously get into any of those discussions, but just during for me, the roughest months of trying to adjust from I was already a hybrid worker in the office, but being home full time where you couldn't be around like really anybody during that time period. So it really opened up a lot of doors for me of maintaining a little bit of sanity, of being able to see people, because at the time, my employer wasn't requiring people to be on camera and things like that. And I thrive, like seeing the three of you guys on a Monday night. I mean, yeah, it's Monday night. I'm like, what day is it? It's Monday. Like, I love this. I love people. So for me, it really opened up doors both internally and then externally as well. And then it gave me a lot of fantastic connections. So when I would go to HealthCon and things like that, it's a terrific environment to learn for Teach the Teacher and things like that. So yeah, it's been terrific for me. Even if I don't instruct, right now, I still maintain that certification in the CTUs and things like that.
It's on my radar, by the way. Yeah.
You should do it. You should totally do it.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. And actually, it wasn't that difficult. If you know what you know, and I'm sure you know,
you can present. You're doing it right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I implore everybody. Yeah.
All right, so we're rounding out the hour soon. So I got two basic questions for everybody here. Just kind of give some advice for the for the future educators out there. But how do you prepare yourself? I should have prepared when doing some speaking exercises. How do you prepare yourself before providing education so that you are successful? Let's start with Bonnie down there in the corner.
All right. Well, what I do, because, and I think we're all really busy people, and you're juggling quite a few things at one time. So it may be by the time the provider was able to meet with me to perhaps go over the results, there have been 15 other audits that took place. So I want to make sure, that I have the integrity. So I quickly review. I take notes when I meet the provider. It's called the meet and greet. And so I take notes for that. I review that just so that I remember, oh yeah, straight out of residency, or, has done this before, or whatever. And then whatever notes I took, I also then will do a quick recap of the audit, check it out really quickly. So I'm prepared, but it's not something that I just sat there and did for hours. Nobody has time for that. That's what the audit was for. But I do familiarize myself and get ready mentally for that provider before the audit. That's what I do.
Oh, coin flip between Catherine and Becky. Who?
In terms of what I would say to anybody who's interested in doing this as they go down the road is, if anything fires your imagination, chase that. Look, dig. I had a boss who once said to me that I'm a digger. Dig, 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 dig. If curiosity will make you a really good, not only a good auditor, but a good coder. Learn different things. That's where you find your specialty too. I'm sure that's how John ended up finding his niche in cardiology. He just was so interested in it that he kept digging until he found out that he was becoming a SME and that's a subject matter expert in that particular field. And I think that's where you find your passion, and that's how you'll end up doing whatever it is that makes you happy in how you do what you do.
And for me, as far as preparing myself before providing education, I try to, I think about some R's as far as like preparing my resources and research and reaching out to peers. I think that is, again, we've talked about this community being so unique, is between LinkedIn and Facebook and all the different chapters. For those of you, I know not everybody is necessarily an AAPC member. I know some are probably through a HEMA. Maybe some are not credentialed at all, and maybe just kind of stumble upon this later at some point. But I think one of the super unique things about this particular profession is there are so many outlets. I think LinkedIn is probably one of the best to find other professionals who, maybe you want to get into auditing, maybe you want to get into learning ambulatory surgical, maybe you want to get into learning about onboarding at, physicians, or whatever the particular groups are, like, or the payer side, or, whatever it is. Like, there's so much out there. And I think that's just one of the things that is so fantastic about what we do, is it's so multifaceted and just so unique and so different, and everybody is so helpful. So
yes,
they really are. They really are.
And is this the one thing that COVID did? Is it made us I go to AAPC presentations and meetings everywhere.
mm-hmm.
I go to Irvine, California. I go to down to West Virginia. You can go everywhere. And that's where you meet people and you find out their knowledge. And then, oh, I didn't know this. And I think that's what makes you able to prepare and be upfront with everybody.
I always say a day I learned something is a great day.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I don't just say that willy-nilly. It's exciting when you
That
I'm a
is.
total coding nerd. I'm like,
Mhm.
that is so cool. Let's talk coding.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
and then we get to be on coding cheerleaders with John.
Mhm.
Thank you, John.
That's a little nice notch, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree.
but also speaking to anybody and is kind of, when you educate others and you share your knowledge, and that sometimes is like the point where you like have put yourself at a higher level. You've gotten to the point where now you can speak your knowledge to the masses. Is a way for you to better yourself. And I think that we need to do more of that. Don't be afraid to talk to other people. Don't be afraid to share your experiences and leap out there. It doesn't have to be done live on camera. I got my start and on Facebook years ago. Like when I was a coder, I spent a lot of time working for a heart and lung hospital, and then I found myself on Facebook answering questions, like everybody, like diving into conversations and putting in my in my 2 cents, and that's where you get the most response. So I think that's a good place to start. Like if you have knowledge, there's always people on Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever that need help. There's chat groups for this. If you really feel that you want to learn how to educate, start there.
Yeah,
Because
give back.
That's going to be somewhere you can do it quickly, easily, and then learn from how to do it and kind of refine your technique.
Exactly.
Last question. If you could list some skills that you think are useful as an educator, what would they be? Go. Let's look at Bonnie.
Oh, me. Good. All right. I think you've got to be able. This goes back to approach. This goes back to your mindset. I think there's so much involved with that. I think you've got to enjoy people. And I really do. I find you've got to enjoy even what you do, the craft that you do. You also have to be, as Catherine said, you have to be curious. I mean, everything we've said sort of culminates and explains that very question. And it's about being and you don't, I remember when I went to school, and I'm pretty extroverted and animated. And I remember, the coding instructor was like, oh, well. And they said, you don't seem the type to be a coder. I don't think it's like that anymore. I think that it may have been the way it was in the past, or the way it was perceived in the past. But I think now it's not just this solitary, put me in the corner, like you said, John. I think you get animated, passionate, excitable people. You get calm people. You get all kinds of people. And everybody has their own style, like you said with the instructor, Catherine. So you learn that, and I think it's know your audience, which we've said all the time. So you have to be present, really present. If you start going on and they start glazing over, try another tactic, or stop for a moment. But there are things you can do. But I do think it's about genuinely caring, genuinely wanting to do it, a true passion. I think it's just that sort of thing that's going to assist in this particular, well, really in anything, but since we're talking coding,
And at least coding isn't in the basement anymore, right? Back in the day, it was.
We're out of the basement now.
You're always in the HIM was always in the basement for some reason, but
oh, that's right, I was. You're right.
Yeah. Research. Understand that it's not just the coding. There's revenue cycle. There's revenue integrity. There's denials. There's all of it is. I find it so interesting to get out of your little world, because there's a lot more out there. And the more you understand all these other pieces that move that are intertwined, makes you more valuable as well.
Oh.
I mean, the doors are wide open. There is so many places to go in health information management, revenue cycle, whatever you want to call us. There are so many directions you can go in.
I think some of the important skills are being patient. I think you definitely need a lot of patience. I think, especially on the education side, not even necessarily like the official, just recognize when somebody is struggling and they won't speak up. Using humor to lighten situations, I think we've talked about, has helped, and to getting people to listen. Not being monotone, I think that is something that also will help with getting people to listen to you, is nobody wants to listen to just the same tone. Like that's you can't, like how Bonnie was just saying, she's very animated.
yeah.
I think that when you can keep the audience, not being like flailing around, but I think that that's big. And I think one of the biggest things is being the person that you were looking for when you were first starting.
Ooh,
I think that
good.
that's
I like that.
Me
that's something for
too.
me
I
is
like
like when I was struggling and I was hitting roadblocks at the beginning and I was just kind of sitting there like, I don't know what to do. Because we didn't have these contacts, right? Like a lot of us have been in this for so long. We didn't have LinkedIn. We didn't even have Facebook. We maybe had MySpace, but like that had music and that was about it. Your top 8. But anyway, like I think that that's the biggest thing is, the giving back and being just the person that you didn't have. So, and that's, like I said, making room and recognizing that in this profession, there is room for everybody, for the quiet ones, for the, not so quiet ones, and just everybody's abilities are unique, and that there's a job, there is a literal role for everybody. So, yeah.
And if you're an instructor, don't just read the PowerPoint.
Oh God, right?
Yeah.
So that's a lot of information we covered today. But if anybody has any questions, I'll leave about a minute or two for you put questions in here. I know it's hard to get to on Facebook or on LinkedIn. Doesn't necessarily put the comments on my feed, so I'll refresh my screen. If anybody has any questions, I'm going to go over some of the comments. There were a lot of comments that were posted that I didn't have a chance to get through because we were kind of speeding through this. But one of them was by Lakeisha. Lakeisha Paris put something in earlier in our presentation. I'm just going to put it on the screen if I can find it. Shows real good a lot. So Lakeisha says usually it relates to our provider documentation. So education is always going to rely on documentation and how we read it and how we perceive it. So if we see trends in the same provider or various providers, particular documentation that, for example, may appear to be copy pasted or incorrect use of templates, then you provide examples and submit to the manager. So you're going to see that. That goes back to the question like, what do I need to say? And their response to that is templating. So again, these are
and that the payers are looking for that. Like we're watching for that.
Yes.
That's your response, is that we see that. So
Yep. And
it's obvious.
as I've said occasionally, this is what you should do. I know you can do what you want to do, but if you want to get paid for it, then you have to do this way. So it's tough because templates are great. Macros are great. They save a lot of time and you can use them all, but you have to customize it for
Use them wisely.
Yeah, they have a place. They have a place, but
they have a place, not on every note and not exactly the same on everyone. Copy and paste also saves a lot of time, but you can reference things, but just be careful. Just be careful.
We'll refresh and see if I have anything new on here. But I just wanted to point out that I do have a lot of comments from a lot of educators on here, which I thought that kind of struck me as relevant to our discussion. But if you have any questions, I'm going to end it here, and I'd like to ask the panelists to hang on a moment afterwards. But if you have any questions, put them in either in the YouTube chat, in the LinkedIn chat, and we'll get to them as we can. Let's see. Nothing else here. That's it. It looks like we're coming up on another off week because there's a holiday apparently next Monday.
Yay!
So
Apparently.
Memorial Day.
Vacation.
Oh, nice.
They
June
kind of
for
take a
me.
preference for those that have served in the past. So we're going to take a week off again, but when we come back, we're going to have some episodes for auditing, which we haven't touched on yet. This is like a prequel to it. And also, I think we got wound care
Yeesh.
coming out as well. So 2 topics that, you're like, oh, interesting. but we'll
Yeah,
see.
that-
They are
It's just-
interesting, but wound care can be a little difficult.
I would
When,
not.
when- and
get
when you're
supper.
scrolling down on the note and not expecting that picture to
No,
pop up
I'm
in
gonna
front of you.
bypass supper for that one.
Yeah, those are pretty.
John, thank you so much for inviting me. I
Yeah.
enjoyed being with these
Yeah.
two lovely ladies.
Same.
I did as well. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you all in about 2 weeks.
Bye, everybody.